Season 2 of the Fallout show is going to be awful. Season 1 of the Fallout show was awful. I have a 7-hour video on it breaking it down thoroughly, both as a standalone show to prove that it's not good on its own, and taking the lore into consideration where it is absolutely destructive. Go watch it after this video. With how bad Season 1 was, it doesn't take Nostradamus to tell you that Season 2 is gonna be fuck awful as well. Last year, prior to Season 1 of Amazon's Fallout show being released, I had made a video outlining reasons I thought the show was going to be bad. There are many signs from interviews and trailers that heavily implied the show would have major problems. They would be messing with the lore, they would have an overly jokey tone, that it in general wouldn't be good. Then we finally got the show, and I was proven to be right. Not every prediction was spot on, mind you, but I was fairly accurate with a good number of my predictions, such as the overwhelming goofy tone, or the fact there would be major retcons despite Todd Howard saying they were paying close attention to the scripts to make sure no such things happened. Further, the show retconned the original Fallout game by inventing 4 vaults out of thin air in the Master's backyard that are all out in the open and easy to see, and he never did anything with them. Amusingly, my video got flooded with comments saying that the video had aged like milk. I can't tell how many of these were legitimate or not, but it did very much appear as bot spam, as bots tend to frequently use the same phrases over and over again, and aged like milk was included in nearly every such comment saying that I was wrong. Some of these comments were posted before the show had even been released by a few minutes, and a good number of them were posted within the first few hours of the show being available, before anyone could even fully watch through the first few episodes, let alone the entire show. I very much look forward to this behavior again with this video. One thing I did last time that I won't be doing this time is giving the show the benefit of the doubt. I had said that there's a chance that it could end up being good, and it turned out to be one of the worst video game adaptations of all time. Yes, even worse than the Halo show. I also have very good reason to have such a negative outlook for the future of the show at this point, with Season 1 being abysmal dog shit, and all the previews and leaked materials for Season 2 already proving to be inconsistent with the games in major ways. In fact, my predictions are already coming true, as there was a prediction of mine that the show would make none of the endings canon from the game. Granted, I'm by far not the only person to have made this prediction, this was obvious to anyone paying attention to the trailers, and while looking up articles to use in this video, one that was shared with me dates back to April of 2024, just after Season 1 had released. But in addition to that, there is the fact that Todd Howard is on record saying that they didn't want to canonize any particular ending for New Vegas.
And obviously Season 2 is going to be featuring some of New Vegas, and we're careful about, maintaining the key events of that game and the great content in it.
Liar!
It is obviously difficult to deal with when you're going back to an area where a game had multiple endings.
Yep.
We have some answers there, but it's hard. It is, I'll just admit, everybody realizes it's hard to sort of canonize or say this is exactly how that game ended. And so whenever we can, I like to avoid it. Like, don't refute anything that happened. Be careful when you're specific about what happened. Just like, we want that game and what the players did to be their reality and true.
This came out quite a while ago, and was the first sign to me that Season 2 would be doing immense damage to New Vegas. To lay it out as plainly as possible, it's impossible to portray any story in the Mojave Desert after the events in New Vegas without in some way canonizing what happened, or otherwise outright decanonizing the whole game. With most quests having choice in how to handle things, and most factions and companions having numerous potential endings, this would have a knock-on effect into the future of the setting regardless. For example, for the Fiends, there's 2 endings in which the Fiends are wiped out entirely. The Legion ending and Mr. House's ending, where Motor Runner is dead. The Fiends existing in Season 1 of the show proves these 2 endings cannot be canon. In similar fashion, we see in one of the trailers that Mr. House is very much still alive, which is only possible in his own ending. While the House ending with Motor Runner being alive doesn't explicitly say the Fiends are wiped out, it very much stands to reason that House, with his robot army, would still wipe them out regardless. So the Fiends continuing to exist is still a problem and a massive contradiction. Fact of the matter is that the show will be visiting locations we've seen before, and based on what we see, things will be canonized one way or another, whether the showrunners intend to or not. However, even worse than that is the full confirmation that none of the main endings of New Vegas are canon, meaning New Vegas itself is not canon. If none of the achievable endings are canon, if the canon set of events as portrayed by the show is an outcome impossible to reach within the game, that renders the entire game non-canon. Now, continuing New Vegas was always going to be a question of who won and how things played out. Naturally, you can't please everyone, as each of the endings have their own supporters for one reason or another. But it is the kind of question that would have to eventually be answered if the franchise is going to continue. For example, I think the Mr. House ending is the best ending, and I would be a bit disappointed if a continuation said the NCR one or the Legion one. However, I'd still be interested to see things continue and see how they play out from there. No matter what ending you take, there are plenty of possibilities to make a good continuation of New Vegas. What we're getting, instead, is that none of the endings are canon. From a PC Gamer article, Jonathan Nolan said the show had deliberately taken the fog of war approach to picking a canon ending for the original game. He seems quite pleased with the choice, calling it an absolutely brilliant way to make an end run around of that whole question. In other words, 15 years after the end of New Vegas, when Fallout's second season takes place, everyone is kinda convinced they won. We had the delicious idea that at the end of a conflict, 15 years down the line, every faction might think they won, which I think has a bit of a poetic quality to it, said Nolan. To anyone who has played the game, this is one of the more foreboding and idiotic things you could ever hear. There is no way in which any of the factions can think they won if they did not actually win. This isn't a war where each faction has different criteria for thinking they won, and therefore somehow can claim victory years later, or alternatively doing so out of a bruised ego or for the sake of morale. You can tell who won by who holds the dam and who holds the strip, both of which should have the same answer. The NCR was looking to expand their nation. They were looking for more resources. The dam would be able to provide more much-needed power back west. Caesar was looking to expand his empire, to make Vegas his seat of power and to defeat the NCR in order to prove the Legion was a legitimate empire. House views the Strip as the last remnant of old world glory, that he can use it to milk the NCR for money, to fund his plans of sending humanity to the stars, to settle on far-off worlds untainted by the folly of the old world leaders who ruined this planet. All of them have the very clear and outlined win conditions of taking control of the dam and the Strip and holding them. See, by not choosing an ending from the game as being canon, the problem runs far deeper than simply decanonizing the ending. It is actively ruining major parts of New Vegas, and effectively retconning the entire game. With none of these endings being canon, the implication is that no one has won, and everything has remained mostly stagnant for a decade and a half. In fact, it almost appears as though the Courier didn't exist at all, or if he did, he never followed through with any faction and abandoned the story halfway through. If everyone thinks they've won, then they're all idiots because it's impossible to think you've won while not actually meeting the win conditions in this particular scenario. House wouldn't think he's won if he hasn't actually won. We see the Strip is in ruins and is apparently home to a Deathclaw now. This implies he doesn't have a Securitron army, which is a key part of his plan, meaning he would not see this as a victory. If he had his army, there's no way the Strip would have fallen so easily. There's no way a Deathclaw could essentially own it like this one apparently does. The NCR shouldn't even be able to keep up a force anymore, what with the NCR being destroyed by Season 1 of the show, not even counting the blatant retcon that they were destroyed before the events of New Vegas according to the show. How are they going to think they won if they don't control the dam and aren't using it to power their cities back in California? The cities that no longer exist, by the way. The NCR is completely absent from the heart of their own territory in Season 1, to the point new towns and factions are arising in these areas, completely unaffiliated with the NCR. Not only is it beyond ridiculous for the NCR to ever think they've won, but even if they did, that victory was undermined and made pointless by the destruction of the NCR back home. And finally, Caesar's Legion should have fractured severely, if not be gone at this point if Caesar is dead, which he should be, if the Courier didn't explicitly go out of his way to remove his tumor. If Caesar is alive, it then becomes a question of why are they not in control. Part of the whole point of the Legion is that without the Courier's intervention, they would have won. House would have had no one to upgrade his robots, the NCR was outmatched at nearly every turn, and there'd be no one to stop the Legion's many plans they had. The president of the NCR would have been assassinated. The Great Khans would have been absorbed into the Legion. The NCR monorail would have been destroyed. He was getting the Omertas on his side to betray House. Regardless of whether or not they won, part of the point of the Legion was also the fact that they wouldn't survive without Caesar. The thing holding the Legion together was a strong and capable leader, and there's no successor in place to keep things together when he's gone, with Linnaeus being the de facto successor, and all information in-game points to him not being able to hold it together. Further, each of the endings tell us what happens at least a little bit into the future, and none of that can be true now either. Essentially, it makes no sense for the world to be the state it's in, based on what we're told in the game, and based on information available from trailers and from interviews and articles for the show. You can't just come in and say that no one won, but they all think they did, as if that's some kind of genius epic 4D chess writing to avoid the problem of choosing an ending. You didn't avoid the problem, you made it 1,000 times worse. This effectively ruins every major faction and renders the whole game non-canon. Apparently they wanted to do this so as to not step on anyone's playthrough, and in doing so, you've ruined every possible playthrough of the game by destroying the story it was telling, and making the canon ending something that is unattainable within the game this season is supposedly continuing the story of. This has a knock-on effect through pretty much the entire game, in a way the show will not be able to solve, and will likely not have an explanation for. There are too many things you can do for each faction in the game that will not make sense with an ending where no one won. This effectively decanonizes New Vegas. Yes, it contains elements from New Vegas, but the events of the games have no longer happened as portrayed in the game. Yes, there are many ways those events can play out in the game, but when none of those events happened, then the whole game is not canon. It's like how Disney keeps pulling from the expanded universe of Star Wars, despite decanonizing the whole thing. The events of Heir to the Empire are no longer canon according to Disney, but they pull from it because they know people will recognize it and eat it up. The Thrawn in Ahsoka isn't the Thrawn from Heir to the Empire. It's very much the same situation here. So much for Todd Howard saying all the events in New Vegas were still canon. While I was expecting it to be this bad, I wasn't expecting them to be so upfront and blatant about it. Moving along, it seems as though we can expect more or less the same tone as the first season, which is to say nothing is taken seriously and everything is a joke, except for probably a few rare story moments that will almost certainly get undermined by things happening around them. Both trailers featured Marvel humor tier jokes, and even as I write the script, a clip got released, much like Season 1, where Lucy goes on in an overly drawn out and unfunny bit of dialogue. So I think it's safe to say this season will be just as irreverent and insincere as Season 1 was. You could probably expect there to be lame references to the game that will get all the Bethesda fans to soypog, like with what happened when they made a joke about side quests in the first season. And no, the constant jokey tone is not what Fallout is supposed to be. The constant stupidity from every character is not what Fallout is supposed to be. While Fallout 2 went overboard with its jokes and pop culture references, Bethesda has turned it up to 11 with constantly pushing the humor and unserious tone into the games to the point the whole tone and setting of Fallout has basically been destroyed. This season of the show will just be more of that. Moving along, I'm expecting them to turn Mr. House into some kind of big bad villain. He was never a villain in the game, but Season 1 showed him to be on board with Vault-Tech's plan of nuking the entire planet, and I expect there to be more of the same kind of stupidity with him in this season. In fact, I don't like to get political, but I expect the typical Hollywood writing where they turn him into an allegory for someone they deeply hate, in particular for this case, Elon Musk. It lines up a bit too well. Super rich tech guy with big ambitions. This show started filming in November of 2024, and the time between then and Season 1 airing was likely the time this season was being written, which would have been during the height of the US 2024 election campaigns. I really hope I'm wrong about this, but this is what I'm expecting. Next up, a similar issue that exists with the main factions in New Vegas already exists with two smaller factions within the game, that being the Great Khans and the Kings. First off, none of the Great Khan endings describe them staying in the Mojave. They either leave the region or they're wiped out. That clip I mentioned earlier that got dropped while I was writing this, it shows the Great Khans in Novak. So apparently the town fell or was taken over at some point, and the Great Khans just kinda break all their endings to be here. It's almost as if they're being used for memorabilia and nostalgia bait purposes, because they know a good portion of the fanbase is as cooked as the remaining Star Wars fanbase is. As long as you show something recognizable, you'll get these people to start soypogging at it, even though it doesn't make any sense given what we know. As for the Kings, well, there's a lot of problems here too. Across their many endings, they essentially have 3 fates. Either they fight to the last man and are wiped out, or are otherwise wiped out in some other way, they fight and lose with some fleeing into the wastes, or they remain in Freeside. In the trailer, the kings are not only ghouls, but they appear to be feral ghouls, who of course still act like Elvis, showing you what a joke this show is and how little respect is given towards the source material. This is a massive problem and doesn't make sense given what we're shown. We see Freeside in the trailers. It is still populated by normal humans. So what could have possibly caused the kings to become ghouls while also still in Freeside? I don't think this is something the show will be able to explain. I'm also just annoyed to see what is generally considered to be a well-liked faction treated so poorly. It seems like rather than trying to do anything with them, they are just turned into fodder for the show's heroes to kill for an action scene. Like, I don't know how you can look at this and just not see it as the absolute disrespect it is towards this faction. Nothing says they have to live. It could make sense, if written well, that they get wiped out. A good chunk of their endings involve them being completely destroyed. But this? It feels very deliberate. The second trailer features a voice on a blank screen to hide the identity of the character. I've seen people speculate that this could be Marcus, but there's some slight modulation sound to the voice, so I doubt it's him. I've seen people speculate, and this is the answer I really fear, that this could be Gorus from Fallout 2, the only possible intelligent Deathclaw to have survived the game. At this stage, I have no idea who it could be, but I feel like the answer isn't going to be good. We also see a Securitron with an error display before switching over to the soldier image. I can only assume this is something they saw in the wiki and just took and used it because they thought it was neat. The Securitrons who had this image on the screen were limited to the failures that Dr. Zero was working on in the Big MT. With my video prior to the release of Season 1, I called out many red flags I saw, especially in relation to the NCR. I questioned why they seemingly had no presence in the trailers despite the show taking place in the heart of their territory. I questioned why the shop had a sign that said caps only, and I speculated on the destruction of Shady Sands, saying they needed to have a really good explanation for this, which of course they didn't. I find myself in a much similar situation here. The article says that all the factions think they've won, which implies that the NCR does still exist in some form, and there were leaked set photos of people in NCR costumes, but we barely see a hint of them in these trailers. There's one woman in what looks like NCR armor at what looks to be Camp Golf. That said, the camp doesn't seem to be well maintained and comes across as abandoned, with her being the only person shown in these shots in the trailer. This show is clearly going to fuck over everything they touch, and seems like they're not done fucking over the NCR yet. I've already talked about this next part in my previous video on Season 2, covering the first trailer, but it's worth bringing up again. The dinosaur in Novak is turned the wrong way, and it's done entirely for the convenience of the writers. It might seem like a small thing, but it's really not. Stuff like this shows a lack of respect and lack of care towards the source material. If anything could be changed on a whim for the sake of convenience, then nothing matters. Remember, the dinosaur was used as a sniper's nest to protect the town. It plays a very big role in this location in the game. Further, the dinosaur is holding a sign advertising the motel. It makes no sense whatsoever that it would be facing towards the motel. But it certainly is, so Lucy can shoot the Great Khans and save the ghoul, which we could see from that cringe-inducing scene they just released. In fact, let's talk about that clip in a bit more depth. I can't show the whole thing here or else the video would get blocked, but I can summarize it. The short version is the ghoul's hanging by his neck for the duration of the scene, while Lucy yammers on to the Khans in stereotypical cringy modern dialogue, and the whole thing is stupid. As for what she's saying, well...
Excuse me. So sorry. I'm hoping you can settle an argument between myself and my traveling companion there. We are hunting down my father, who is not a good guy. And on this journey, we found ourselves in need of food and supplies. Plan A was to leave you alone and avoid this scenario altogether, but we tried that and I just started starving to death. Plan B, his idea, by the way, was for me to turn him over to you so that you would open up your safe and give me the considerable bounty you put out on him.
Fucking shoot!
The idea was I would shoot him down, you take your weapons, and use whatever violence necessary in order for us to escape. Which, in my experience thus far, it's a lot of violence. So, I'm really hoping you'll agree to Plan C.
What's Plan C?
You just let us go. And we keep the caps you gave me. Which, to be clear, we do need for our survival. And just to ask the question, would it help if I said please?
I mean, what can I say besides what I always say every time I have to deal with this kind of obnoxious dialogue? It's stupid and obnoxious, it serves no purpose, it's too self-aware and insincere, it doesn't take the situation seriously at all, and why the fuck are the cons just standing around rather than doing anything about this? Why is she yapping while the ghoul is apparently dying? Is he dying? Can he die? I don't know, probably not. He got shot in the back multiple times to no effect, so he's probably fine to just hang there as long as necessary. It's not like anything actually matters in this god-awful show. The last thing I want to talk about is the power armor. No, not the god-awful NCR Ranger power armor, which shouldn't exist. And no amount of stupid cope arguments from defenders will change that fact. No, the problem I have is that all the power armor used in the show so far, and from what we've seen in trailers, aside from that abomination, is a T-60 power armor. As a reminder, this power armor existing at all is a major retcon from Fallout 4, in which this power armor was invented from thin air and deployed just a few months before the bombs dropped, just so the game could have a new set of power armor. As another reminder, the original game said that the T-51B power armor was the most advanced power armor prior to the war. Fallout 4 tries to get around this by having T-60 be limited to a small area, but it's still a retcon. This is made worse by the fact it appears to be the only power armor that anyone seems to have now. The classic design, what would have been the far more common design, has not appeared in the show yet to date. This is a small part of a bigger problem I have with the newer Fallout entries. From 4 onwards, and I'll have to go over it in more depth in my full analysis of Season 2 once it's fully released, but Bethesda has been supplanting the original designs and aspects from the original games with their own new designs. Especially after Season 1, effectively retconning Fallout 1, and Season 2 having already retconned New Vegas. It very much seems as though Bethesda is trying to erase the past of Fallout. It feels like they're insecure about their entries being so heavily criticized, so they're in effect overwriting what was there before with their own shit to fully lay claim to the franchise by making the only relevant lore their own, which as usual is a contradictory mess on its own. They say never assume malice when stupidity will suffice, but I don't think stupidity suffices when this much damage is being done to the franchise every time they do something with it. Based on the trailers, based on the interviews and articles, based on the first season, I have every reason to expect the second season of this show to be complete and utter dog shit. In fact, I believe it's going to be far worse than Season 1. I expect it to be more damaging to the lore of the games, and I expect it to outright ruin and destroy every aspect of New Vegas it touches. One of the cope arguments from Bethesda fans that I've seen is that the fans in New Vegas don't want the world to progress, even though that is obviously what most fans of the games would want. When you tell these people that the destruction we see isn't the timeline progressing, that it looks like everything is stagnating, the comeback is often for them to say that the timeline has progressed, that the destruction and ruination of everything, by society being destroyed, by everything constantly being reset to the perpetual wasteland, is the timeline progressing. The people who spout this utterly moronic drivel only look at things in the way most convenient to their arguments, to defend their sacred cow. The timeline has progressed only in the most literal form. The time itself continues to move forward at the rate it always has. However, Fallout was all about people and the conflicts they have, and society rebuilding in the aftermath of the nuclear apocalypse. Bethesda made their first 2 games take place 200 years after the war, and there has been no real attempt at rebuilding society. Only loose groups of people forming settlements together with little to no organization. 200 years, and people are living in the ruins of the old world, and shacks cobbled together from loose bits of wood and metal. This gives something of a lawless Mad Max type wasteland vibe, where it's just you in the wasteland and a couple rare locations to stock up on supplies. You can do whatever you want with little to no consequence, and nothing really matters. Then we finally get a continuation of the story on the West Coast, where society has rebuilt, through the show only to have the biggest faction in the entire franchise get effectively wiped out off-screen by a cuck. Shady Sands was nuked and the entire region completely lacks their presence in any real form. Now we see nothing has progressed in the Mojave. The setting has not progressed in any way, it has stagnated. Everyone thinks that they won the war from 15 years ago, despite apparently all the factions still existing in the region, and nothing really changing on a major level. This isn't the continuation of the story with a vision in mind. This is a moron coming in and trampling everything that was there, and keeping all the recognizable elements to serve as nostalgia bait, but has no understanding of what any of them mean or the role they played within the world. This is the writing of a moron who sees the Kings, and the only takeaway is that they impersonate Elvis, so of course they still act like Elvis's feral ghouls. This season is going to be abysmal dog shit. It doesn't have a chance in hell of being good. In fact, I'm expecting it to be one of the most poorly written things we've gotten. But that's all I've got for today. If you liked the video, please subscribe. I will be covering the show as I did with the first season, with episode-by-episode reactions, followed by a complete analysis of the season, and maybe a video talking about all the worst retcons of the season. Also, check out my other videos, such as my 5-part Fallout 4 analysis series, which is finally complete, my Fallout 3 analysis, which is also finally complete, or my breakdown of Season 1 of this god-awful show. Once again, thank you for watching.